Welcome back for more physiology. Today we're going to deal with autonomic function, and we're going to look at how does the sympathetic and parasympathetic balance for survival. So when we look at the nervous system, it's strange because it's just a bunch of cells. They don't really function like a collection of tissues, unlike, skeletal muscle and smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or, if you happen to have dense regular connective tissue, so you're dealing with dense regular, dense irregular. I'm trying to think of names and I can't do it for whatever reason. The nervous system really isn't that. It's a neuron, and then you have support cells, which we call glial cells. And when we look at where those things are collected, we find patterns. So I can either have a clumping in the brain and a clumping down from the brain that we call a spinal cord that runs through the center of your body, so we call that the central nervous system. Or I could find those neurons kind of scattered away from that, and we call that the peripheral nervous system. Okay, that makes the anatomy easy, but it doesn't necessarily make the functioning easy. A functional definition of where we find the nervous systems would be what we call the somatic and the autonomic. Somatic meaning I get a say as to what's happening. Autonomic meaning I don't really get a say as to what that turns out to be. The somatic we've actually dealt with before when we talked about how do you make muscles contract. So when I look at the autonomic, I can divide it into two camps. I can either call it the sympathetic or the parasympathetic. Both of them turn out to have different functions, but ultimately their job is don't die on me. The sympathetic's function is fight or flight. So something bad is happening, you have to have an adrenaline rush, so we're going to do whatever is necessary to keep you alive. So you're going to see things better, you're going to smell things better, you're going to hear things better, your heart's going to race, you're going to get jumpy, you're going to breathe faster, but you're not necessarily going to want to digest food. You're not going to want to hold on to any wastes that you have. So we get a series of events that occur. The parasympathetic, its function is rest and recuperate, or rest and relax. So what is that going to be? Everything opposite of being scared to death. So you're not going to notice anything, you're not going to hear anything, you're not going to smell anything, you're going to want to be hungry, you're not going to have a high heart rate, you're just going to sit there and want to just fall asleep. Both of them are necessary for survival. The question is, which one do you need more? And the answer is, you need both. Because too much sympathetic stimulation is probably bad for you, much like how having too much parasympathetic is probably bad for you. When we look at the sympathetic, it all originates from what we call the sympathetic chain, which is found along the thoracic portion of your spinal cord. So from T1 to T12, we turn out to have a whole bunch of nerves that pop out and have a parallel chain that we call the sympathetic chains on the right and left side of the spinal cord, which turn out to be the originating point for the spinal, or for any type of sympathetic spinal response. If it turns out to be just a normal spinal nerve, it bypasses the sympathetic chain. But if it turns out to be something that involves the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, we're going to have a synapse in that chain and then send information on out. If I look at the parasympathetic, that's not necessarily that way, where it's all trapped in a region. We'll have, for a very small portion, a little bit of your sacral nerves turn out to have some type of parasympathetic response. A few of your cranial nerves, so like you'll have the oculomotor and the facial and the glossopharyngeal. Those ones will have some say as to what's going on. But the main contributor to your parasympathetic function is the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10, where that's going to do most of the dirty work. When I look at these things, it turns out I can tell not only from where they originate or what the responses are, if it's sympathetic or parasympathetic. I can look at where the ganglia turn out to be. The sympathetic chain is where the ganglia will be for. Ganglia is just a little bubble where you happen to have synapses. That's not brain or spinal cord. So if you look at the sympathetic division, we'll find that in either the sympathetic chain or, in a few cases, the adrenal medulla. So not the cortex, the outside of the adrenal gland, but the inside, the medulla, which is strange because we usually think of the adrenal gland as being one gland. In reality, it's 2 glands. The parasympathetic will turn out to have its ganglion near the organs of question. So the ganglia are found in different locations. If I look at the neurotransmitters, I have different answers. The first synapse will end up releasing acetylcholine, but the second one is where we'll see something different. If we're dealing with the sympathetic, we'll have epinephrine or norepinephrine, which is a nice way of saying adrenaline. If we're dealing with the parasympathetic, it's also going to be acetylcholine. So what does your brain have to do with any of this? Well, it turns out your brain is capable of tricking your autonomic. Part of your parasympathetic comes out of your ANS, but you can think thoughts that could actually trigger sympathetic or parasympathetic function. We call that phenomenon psychosomatic behavior, and it turns out to be very, very fascinating because some of you need to practice it a lot. If you are prone to have panic attacks or you have anxiety or what have you, you can be taught ways to calm yourself down. An example of that would be meditation. And the result of that is through a conscious effort. So you choosing to do this, you can change your body from a sympathetic response to a parasympathetic response. Thus begging the question, is your autonomic nervous system really autonomic?